Hello, and welcome to another one of our regular weekly discussions of essays and speeches by Dr. Leonard Peikoff. Today, the essay that we'll be discussing was a speech delivered by Dr. Leonard Peikoff at Boston's famous Ford Hall Forum in 1998. A little background: the Ford Hall Forum had for decades provided objectivist speakers, starting with Ayn Rand and then Leonard Peikoff, with an incredibly fair forum. And this was one of his last Ford Hall Forum speeches, but I think one of his most important ones. Leonard Peikoff had been invited to debate someone on the issue of abortion, and he was told that his debating opponent would be using a lot of pictures, and that Dr. Peikoff himself would be free to use pictures if he wanted to. But Dr. Peikoff said, "No, I'm not going to engage in a debate in which pictures are a major element of the debate as such, because pictures can't decide an issue like abortion." And the classic example that he uses throughout most of this article is just that, the example of abortion. We're often showed magnified pictures of a fetus inside a mother's womb. These pictures are clearly look like a human baby, and often magnified pictures. But a magnified picture of a fetus inside a woman's womb does not answer the question of abortion any more than a photograph of a dead body of an adult who died, their dead body, or any more than a magnified picture of a zygote in the first few days of pregnancy would answer the question. No one picture obviously could do that. And Dr. Peikoff makes the philosophical point that pictures, when used as argument, when used as the substance of an argument, are necessarily misleading. They narrow the focus to one single aspect out of context from the context. It narrows our focus rather than helps us integrate all of the relevant data. And therefore, what it does is tries to evoke emotions that bypass, that seduce us and get us riled up. The examples of this are infinite, in fact. I mean, pictures, for example, of civilians suffering radiation burns following the atomic bomb blasts at Nagasaki or Hiroshima. Such pictures are sad and horrific, and no one can say, "Yay, wonderful, isn't that great?" It invokes emotions of sympathy for any human being, no matter what the context. But even if I were to show you pictures, say, of the conventional bombings of Dresden or Tokyo, and how tens of thousands of innocent civilians and children were lost their lives there, that wouldn't answer the question, even juxtaposing those pictures. To say, well, a conventional assault on Japan would have cost even more civilian lives, and so forth, both for Americans and Japanese civilians. Even that wouldn't tell you that. Images out of context cannot make an argument. Images can be evidence, they can be data. For example, this assumes, and Dr. Peikoff assumes through this, that the photograph itself is a fair and accurate representation. In our age of Photoshop, we have to watch that and be careful about that. But even assuming that the photograph is a fair and accurate representation of what it is photographed, it still won't answer the question. No one picture can do that, can sufficiently provide an argument. For that, we need concepts. For that, we need words. We need to put the picture into context, for example. We need to understand that data in relation to all sorts of other data, and that pictures simply cannot do. But what they can do is evoke strong emotions and mislead people if taken out of context. And so this is an example of context keeping. Pictures are one example in the sort of objectivist approach to knowledge of a fact out of context, and how no single fact out of context can really answer an abstract question, a generalization. For that, we need other methods. And with that, I'll turn it over to my interlocutor today, familiar to all you folks out there, Ed. How are you doing today, Ed?
I'm doing fine, James, and I really enjoyed listening to this lecture, and I do think that at least part of it is very accessible to many people, and many people, I think, will be able to relate to things that Dr. Peikoff is saying here. Now, to start us off, I just wanted to share an example that I can relate from my own experience, and that's when the pandemic started, and when all the newsreels across the world would show people suffering with respiratory diseases, people dying, people getting buried. Now, there is only one emotion that one can experience watching such scenes, right? And that's maybe despair, horror, you name it.
Sadness, horror. Yeah.
They will all definitely be negative emotions, right?
When I
Now,
saw those pictures of people being in Italian hospitals being forced outside in large numbers, sitting out there with severe illnesses, dying outside of Italian hospitals, that sent emotional shockwaves across the West, in my country in particular. They did not want the Italian experience of overcrowded hospitals. So here you see all these people being sort of triaged, who gets the treatment, who doesn't, who gets admitted into the hospital, and those nightmare pictures of hospitals in Milan had a huge emotional impact. But can they settle the dispute as to how to handle COVID? Can they tell us why Italian hospitals were overwhelmed with COVID? No, they can't. All they can do is evoke strong emotions of sympathy and horror and sadness, like you say. Nobody likes to see people dying and suffering. No one likes to see hospitals making tough triage decisions. But those decisions can evoke in us an emotion that can overwhelm our objective thought.
right, and at that point, personally, I thought watching these scenes, I thought, okay, there is something wrong here. I would not have been able to identify what exactly was wrong, but there was a point where I just said, I'm not going to watch any news from now on. All I really want is to understand, okay, what are the hard facts that I can get? What are the deaths? What are the demographics of people dying? Which geographical areas seem to be affected? So I just wanted to get hard facts about let's say, the effects of the disease. I probably could not study the cause of the disease because that would require training in certain medical fields, but at least I could see hard facts that I could use to make my own decisions, and that was much more effective than watching something like Sky News and seeing people in the hospital. Now that's how I that is exactly what I was thinking about as I was watching the first part of this lecture. Now there are many more examples that we can think of, but I think that at least a few help us form this concept of picturism. But I also made another cross classification here, and Peikoff does get to it later. He does say that all these instances, all these emotional invocations, they can be called they can be called the anti-conceptual mentality, but I wanted to cross-classify them as anti-conceptual invocations, because I think that's all many different instances and concretes can be cross-classified under this concept. And another one concrete that can be also subsumed under this is humorous smears that sometimes get used in debates. And I was thinking back to 1984 debate between Peikoff and Ridpath and the socialists from the Canadian University, whereby you would see Dr. Ridpath and Dr. Peikoff provide very sound arguments in favor of capitalism, and the opposition would degrade to just humorous kind of remarks, smears, some jokes about appearance. When things get to that level, that it's not about ideas anymore.
Any invocation of an emotion outside of context is obviously just a rank appeal to subjectivism. If I am what Dr. Peikoff is talking about here, if I, for example, even if I mention one single fact out of context, there are people hungry in the world, let's say, as my argument for socialism. That one fact out of context, even if it's not an image, is simply insufficient to answer the question. Right? Even if your question is what system is better off for most people, or what system is better off for the poor, showing me that there are hungry people somewhere by itself does not answer that question. I need a whole lot more facts. But this picturism that he's talking about does involve actual images, but it's just an example of that. It's merely an example of taking a single image, assuming it's even fact, taking a single fact out of context and using that to narrow your focus, what we call being the concrete bound mentality, or the anti-conceptual mentality, very well discussed in Ayn Rand's essay, The Missing Link, for example, and implicitly in other essays by Ayn Rand. The anti-conceptual mentality, the concrete bound mentality, is what we're talking about here. And what pictures have the capacity of doing is uniting both a concrete bound, narrowing focus onto a single fact, giving it all the importance to the exclusion of every other fact that's relevant, and the invocation of emotion by means of the picture, And so in this case, what he's talking about is not merely, a single fact out of context being insufficient, but that single fact being an emotion evoking image. And so when you say humorous memes or humorous thoughts, memes come to mind for me. They'll show an image and then they have one humorous line. Again, a picture, even with one humorous line, is not going to answer any abstract question of any significance, is it? Dr. Peikoff definitely insists, though, and continuously reminds us that, of course, an accurate picture can be evidence. It can be data, which, along with a whole bunch of other data, if taken into a context and conceptualized, can help answer the question. More than that, when we even have a conceptualization, that is a good conceptualization, an image can actually be used to illustrate that in various ways. A picture could be relevant to that. A diagram could be relevant to that. But it's only an illustration. It's only an aid to the wider conceptual argument that's being made.
And so just also a very nice contrast to let's say a supplement, right? A supplementary use of a picture, let's say a drawing of an internal combustion engine, along with a description of how it works, how it functions, how it can transmit chemical energy into thermal energy into mechanical energy. That kind of contrast is definitely useful in saying that in certain contexts, when conceptual information is provided, a picture can be very, very useful. And I just remember, like, the reason I said internal combustion engine, because when I first understood how it worked, I remember there being a picture of it, and I remember reading about different cycles of a single cylinder in an internal combustion engine, and understanding how it works by first reading about it and then looking at the picture. So just to reiterate, there are definitely contexts when pictures are useful. We have a super chat from Kindred Amy, who has provided us with $9.99. And she says, I'd love to see you discuss how QAnon blew the crowd of otherwise decent and smart people via internet brainwashing. Not sure if you're familiar using emotional arguments and information overwhelm. Now, I'm not familiar with QAnon, but as to the second part of the question, using emotional arguments and information overwhelm I think you mean to overwhelm the crow. That is definitely something that I can personally relate to. Sometimes you'll hear so many fallacies in one in one sentence that you kind of just like you're completely baffled. So I don't know if you have anything to
Well,
relate to overwhelming of the crow, James.
well, a single picture can involve multiple elements that aren't directly relevant to the question at hand and can mislead us in terms of asking us to go off in different directions. So if you ask me just from a picture, what's relevant to the question at hand, I still have to use conceptual thought to zero in on the aspect of the picture which is relevant to this question. A single picture can give me all kinds of irrelevant information to the question as well, which also might be emotionally evocative. QAnon is a conspiracy, a right-wing conspiracy website, Ed, that did convey a lot of very emotional information, but mostly in verbal form. And so I'm not sure how it quite relates here because I'm not familiar enough. I wasn't a follower of QAnon, so I'm not familiar enough with this conspiracy website to know how frequently they used photographs or images to make their arguments. But that's what Dr. Peikoff is talking about here. Take, for example, there are many examples recently. Take, for example, now take an example where I would have some sympathy with the people making the bad argument. There was an image once, recently, I think in the last couple months, of an immigration enforcement officer on horseback. And they had an image of him using his rein like a whip. And there appeared to be an immigrant right there beneath him that he was whipping. And so those images of the immigration officer that looked like he was atop a horse whipping this poor, immigrant, invoked all kinds of emotions in people. As it turns out, of course, that single photograph could not explain itself. He was not whipping. All the eyewitnesses and all the other evidence there showed that the immigration enforcement officer, as much as I'm in favor of liberal immigration laws, the picture used by the pro-immigration people there was simply misleading. He was not whipping an illegal immigrant. He was managing his horse and so forth. The picture itself, taken out of context, was used to evoke emotions, drop the context of every other fact. Another case comes to mind recently. I don't know how wide a press it got in Europe, but the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. The young man who shot 3 people on the streets of a rioting day in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There was a big trial, it was televised all over the United States. Eventually, the young man was found not guilty because of self-defense, even though he shot 3 people that night. And nearly the entire incident was captured on a series of videotapes. Almost the entire incident from the beginning to the end, they found smartphone videos of what was going on. And even after having the media and the jury presented with every single image of almost the entire event from front to start, that did not answer the question. It did not answer the question of whether Mr. Rittenhouse had acted in reasonable self-defense. Even ignoring the information that wasn't contained in the videotape, does it tell us whether or not, say, let's change the circumstances a little. What if earlier that day he'd emailed a friend saying, I really want to go out and kill people that day, and so I'm going to go pick up a gun and kill people that day? Would that have affected? Yes, there's wider context here. Or the absence of such evidence, would that have affected the way we regard the reasonableness of Mr. Rittenhouse's behavior in taking a gun to that situation on that dangerous night? See, it depends too on whether you thought these were mostly peaceful protesters that he was out to harass. That's the idea in some people's mind. So based on even a series of images which capture almost the entire event, you're not going to conceptually interpret that. You're going to be unable to evaluate the reasonableness of his behavior without further contextual evidence that you need to integrate. Both of those examples really come to mind quickly for me, how pictures can be so badly misused or misunderstood. Even though I think I agree that Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense, I don't regard him as a hero like a lot of people on the right regard him as a hero. I think at the end of the day, it was probably a mistake for him to go out that night. 3 people ended up dead because he went out with a gun that night. Maybe not, and he was alone. He was risking his own life unwisely, in my view. All of that may relate to his judgment, but in my mind, sure, he's not guilty, but it's not the videotape alone that got me to that position. It was the wider context and all the other evidence and facts. And see, that's really the problem here. A photograph intentionally zeroes in on one little aspect, on only one aspect, to the exclusion of all the others, when in fact understanding something conceptually, much less being able to morally or legally evaluate it, requires high abstractions that simply are inaccessible to any single image or even series of images.
So as I was listening to the lecture, I wanted to really hit the point home for myself and essentialize why this is a problem, why the constant bombardment of images to prove a polemical point is a problem. And I came up with the following, if you have any comments about that. So I wrote down that epistemological manipulation of the viewer causes him to drop context by drawing an emotional response about a particular concrete. So also it is the opposite of integration. I think that this kind of summarizes what we've been saying. I wondered if you had any comments about that. So the main point here being epistemological manipulation causes to drop context and draw an emotional response about a particular concrete. That's how I understand the problem in essential terms.
Exactly. That'd be a really good description, it seems to me, of the fallacy he's talking about here, the fallacy of picturism, the fallacy of using an image as a substitute for a conceptual argument. Dr. Peikoff is here saying we need to use our words. We need to use concepts. For only concepts can actually get us the information and allow us to use the information. Take a concept like table. Table represents not just the single table in front of me right now. It represents every table that has ever been, every table in existence, including every table I've not seen. It includes every table that will ever yet exist. And so the concept of table allows me to handle this open-ended number of concretes with a single unit. This permits me to be able to deal with all the tables that have ever existed all at once. And so I can relate tables to other things. My ability to relate tables to other things would be impossible if all I did was start out with a single image of a single table. Even 3 tables, even 4 tables. And at some point, my mind's going to break down. I'm not going to be able to hold in my head, because mind is limited. I can only hold so many units in my head at once. If I don't have the power of concepts, I cannot really address things at the human level of understanding, nor could I possibly hope to deal with the number of concretes involved. Take the examples, for example, Dr. Peikoff uses here. There's the classic Greek syllogism, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Consider just the concept man to get to the concept human being there. Now, it is true that all human beings will die and are subject to death. All human beings are mortal, yes. But I have to be able to have a concept like man, which includes all men, every human being on the planet. And for me to be able to handle every human being on the planet with one unit, I need to get to the concept just of man, much less all men are mortal. Mortal means something else. And how would I picture mortal? I guess I could show a series of pictures of animals and people getting old and dying, or getting sick and dying, or dying in accidents and, plane crashes. But would that tell me that all men are mortal? Even if I had 1,000 images, which my mind couldn't hold, would 1,000 images of people dying, would that convey to me the mortality part? No, it would not. So for me to be able to relate huge numbers of things like all men to mortality is simply beyond the capacity of any image or series of images to be useful or at all. My ability to relate these broad abstractions is simply impossible unless I get to the conceptual level of thought. Now, when you talk about a concept like rights, political rights, which are involved in things like issues of self-defense or abortion or whether the immigration officer was whipping the guy or not, when you get to moral evaluation, take the concept of rights. Those of us who've been taking the Leonard Peikoff workshops on Sundays, and I just want to put in a plug here for the Leonard Peikoff workshops that we do, where we discuss Leonard Peikoff courses on Sunday in depth, and it's available to paid subscribers of Ayn Rand Center UK. We've been inductively deriving concepts like rights, inductively arriving at the premises behind the concept of rights. Even those abstractions are necessary. What would we need to justify a concept of rights? Well, from the objectivist standpoint, you'd need to know something about life as such. You'd need to know something about humanity and the role of reason in human survival versus animals who can only deal with one another by force. How could you possibly convey just ideas like that simply through images? No series of images could ever get you by itself to the concept of rights, which is only accessible, which is an invisible thing. I can't see rights. Rights is, I can see specific instances where rights are violated, perhaps, but even that from a single image is impossible to determine. All it will tell me is one limited little fact that may or may not. So, for example, Leonard Peikoff says, show me a picture of a needle going into an arm. Mm-hmm. Just that, a needle going into an arm. Does that tell you whether or not it's a doctor providing a life-saving treatment to a patient who might die? Or does it tell you whether it's a junkie putting heroin into his own arm in effect committing suicide on the installment plan? It does not. It doesn't even tell me that wider context of facts, much less have the capacity to get to the level of evaluating one as good and one as bad. It's simply inaccessible to us. If we were just using concrete, specific facts out of context. We need to relate the facts and to be able to relate large swaths of facts to one another. And if we don't have the abstract level of consciousness, the very function of concepts is to provide the unit economy to our limited consciousness, which only holds so much in its head at one time, and our ability to deal with vast numbers of concretes beyond anything we can see and directly perceive, and even relate them to one another. Simply impossible through the use of images.
Peikoff then takes it to the extreme, and he says that in that original situation where he was invited to debate abortion, he was told that you're also welcome to use visual images to state your arguments. And he said, no, that's not going to work. So I was initially slightly baffled by it, but then as I saw the awesome reason of Leonard Peikoff in action, that cleared it up. So even if Peikoff could make Opar into a movie,
which would be impossible.
I do not know what that would look like, and Peikoff does attempt to actually kind of try to understand what would this look like, because in order to argue abortion, he would need to bring in concepts like human rights, right, which could not stand without us understanding what life is and what life requires. And
right. So even if he had images to evoke emotion on his side, show me back alley abortions with women hemorrhaging and getting ill and infected, or maybe even dying from, quack abortions, which would necessarily happen if abortions were made illegal, for example. Or let's talk about how women's lives might be ruined, the depression, the suicide, the frustration of women who have had their careers taken away from them, who've had their lives planned for them. Or maybe show me pictures of unwanted babies being abused, or in extreme cases being literally thrown out of windows by irresponsible, put into trash dumpsters by teenage mothers. I could show you all of those negative images that would result from making abortion illegal too. Would they? Even putting all those images together, would those images by themselves be an argument? No. Peikoff is saying that even if I presented my own series of images that showed you the horrors of making abortion illegal, that would be no more a valid argument than showing me the magnified picture of a 3-month fetus in a woman's uterus.
Yeah, and so then it goes on to kind of so Peikoff then goes on to explain why, even if he could pull off such a feat, which of course he could not for the very same reason that you just explained, why would that still not stand in the context against anti-abortionist position? And so he actually asks the audience why, and he says, you guys now have 10 seconds to kind of come up with an answer why, which I thought was very unfair, but beyond the point. So I did not manage to answer the question. I was just listening along. So he does explain that it is because of a very basic epistemological concept, and that is the crow. The crow, as Ayn Rand describes it in the introduction to objectivist epistemology, is an attribute of human mind to only hold so many entities in mind at once. And so the anti-abortionist position, because there would only be one concrete that it would kind of present, the fetus getting damaged, for example, would win out in the context against all part of the movie, which would have to show so many different images as we have just established.
I mean,
do you have any?
Do you imagine attempting to establish any one of the abstract principles in any philosophy by means of images? It simply could not be done. It simply could not be done. And after a series of mind-numbing series of images of what is life, what is reason, contrasting it to other things, and hoping that the viewer is conceptualizing all of this properly, which is no guarantee by itself, you would have bored and broke the person. You'd have broken their crow. They couldn't have retained each of them without words. We need words to think. Concepts are indispensable to thought. All consciousness is necessarily limited. There is no such thing as an infinite, unlimited consciousness that can hold, thousands of units in its mind, an open-ended number of units in its mind at a time. The whole function of concepts is to allow me to relate vast numbers of concretes to one another in simple ways that my limited mind can handle. In order to do that, I have to reduce the units that I'm dealing with mentally. And that's precisely the function of concepts. Ayn Rand's revolutionary theory of concepts is the answer here. But we can't ever answer the question without words, without the concepts. No picture can do it. Simply, no picture can do it. A picture, in fact, all it can do, and why he would lose the argument, is that once you've got, and a certain number of people just seeing the magnified image of the fetus, emotions have kicked in. And once those strong emotions have kicked in, your chances of getting through to them on a complex, abstract philosophical argument are basically gone. Gone. They need to recover. Even a good person who has a strong emotion, say, to a lot of these examples that we used. The COVID pictures you said, people are feeling sad and horrified. In that mental state of being horrified at what's happening, in Italian hospitals because of COVID, say, which did so horrify the American audience, you can't think straight in that context. You've got to calm down and say, oh yes, there are other facts that may be relevant. I may not be understanding why all the relevant facts on the table here. You got to get over that emotion, get that bias and subjectivity out so you can think straight. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to use your words to understand it at all. There is no philosophical matter. There is no highly abstract matter that can be understood by means of pictures, a series of pictures, a whole video of pictures. They do not explain themselves. They do not put themselves in context. And yet the level of conceptual awareness allows us to penetrate into things that are actually invisible, like rights. Just consider Newton's laws of physics. They are not perceivable. You could watch apples fall 1,000 times and not come up with Newton's Principia. It's conceptual.
So, having made this connection to epistemology, which I think is absolutely crucial here, there's no other way that Peikoff could possibly explain what he means in this lecture without epistemology. So I think the actual cashing in here in this lecture is when he connects the issue to ethics. And so there is one particular sentence that I've picked up. Well, I've actually essentialized it in my own terms, but the premise is something like this. So picture mongering trumps one's confidence in reason. Now, for those of you who have seen our video that we've done on the lecture of certainty and happiness, will know the kind of conclusions that came out of that lecture. And so let's just think about what happens to one's conceptual faculty, if any, when what one has are not conceptual file folders, but disconnected concretes that are stored in this visual state and that are linked not by syllogism and proposition, but by mere chance association and emotion. What happens, James? What happens to one's ability to live? What happens to one's certainty? And most importantly, what happens to one's ability to achieve his own values?
Well, the concrete bound mentality is going to be necessarily disintegrated. They're going to be the abstract conceptual level of awareness is if it's unavailable to them, then they will never have the confidence of knowing what they're doing, period. One image could evoke one emotion, and a totally inconsistent set of values could evoke an entirely different emotion from another image. And if you were to say to someone, wait a minute, the position that came about from your emotional reaction to this image is utterly inconsistent with the emotional reaction you took from this instance. So they would be completely disintegrated. They would have no consistent approach. In no instance could they be confident that they were actually doing the right thing or acting even with reference to, say, sound scientific principles. The entire realm of abstraction would be inaccessible to them in any objective way. They'd be going, in effect, from concrete to concrete, like a newborn baby looking at the world anew without any of their previous knowledge being able to be brought to bear. It's with our concepts that we can bring to bear all of our previous knowledge to a new concrete instance. They would have to face each new concrete instance like a newborn baby, right? This is my emotional reaction to that. And obviously, they're also blind to the nature of emotions. Emotions represent evaluations, sometimes subconscious evaluations. That's why we're not always aware that they come from conceptual evaluations. Our emotions beyond the physical pleasure-pain level are the result of our conceptual evaluations of things. So even to understand your emotional reaction to an image requires conceptual identification. If you treat it as just a given, this emotion automatically is caused by this concrete image, then you are, in effect, an unconceptual being. Your words are merely rationalizations at best, but you have no ability to relate broad abstractions, large numbers of concretes to one another. This will necessarily result in undermining your confidence in all of your knowledge. It'll make you an emotionalist in your approach to issue after issue, and it will habituate subjectivism and therefore undermine your chances for happiness, necessarily.
I definitely agree, and even identifying or let's say differentiating between cognition and evaluation as your own mental process is probably something that such people would not be able to do. They'll not be able to even see when are they experiencing an emotional response and when are they looking at an object in reality and saying, okay, this is a table. They probably would not even be able to tell a difference.
What series of images could I show you that could explain the cognitive basis of emotions? I'd have to go through a series of images showing people what? Reacting to this and reacting to that and then reacting to this and then react. And without concepts, without my words, even those images would be utterly inexplicable. Utterly inexplicable. See, okay, what I do? I show you someone close to them dies and they're crying at the funeral. Okay, I should show you what. Someone is enjoying a wonderful meal. They're having pleasure. Okay, that over there. Now, how many such images, and before a person could even connect why I've put those images together, their crow is broken down with all the images that I have to load up just to get that concept, even a fair representative sample. So, no, absent concepts, absent words, we are simply unable to understand the issue.
Agreed. And so that eventually leads Peikoff to say that such a mentality would need to take a malevolent universe premise as a given because of all the things that we have just enumerated. Because for such a mentality, universe would be unintelligible, right?
Right. All you have is these images of earthquake victims and typhoon victims from around the world, disease victims from around the world, all these crises, this, that, this other, poverty, hunger, you name it, disease, war. All you'd end up thinking is, my gosh, the world is filled with all these horrible things that I need to have immediate visceral reactions to, and that's all that counts. Wait a minute. You'd be helpless in actually dealing with the evils of the world. You'd be utterly helpless, and therefore a malevolent universe principle, because only the conceptual faculty can competently allow us to deal with the world. If you don't have the faculty that allows you to understand the world, you will end up with a malevolent universe principle. It's almost inevitable.
And I'm going to mention our episode on certainty and happiness once again and contrast what we have just been describing with the right way of thinking, with holding a rational and very, let's say, a very reality-based conceptual mentality as one's system of thinking. And if we compare this to what we've just described that has led us to malevolent universe premise, the antithesis to that would be a benevolent universe premise. Why? Because rationality and establishing your concepts inductively, let's say we really want to take it to the basics and we really do want to establish everything from the things that we see in reality. If that's how we establish our concepts, we will be able to hold them as units and we will be able to operate them. We will, let's say, from a wide range of observation, we will know that objects tend to fall to the ground at a certain pace. We'd know that certain chemicals produce certain chemical reactions. You name it. That we'd know that we'd know about planetary motions. I can keep going. but you get the idea. We would have airplanes, we'll have starships, we'll have cars.
They say a picture says 1,000 words, as Dr. Peikoff says here. Well, yeah, which words and which thousand are relevant to this case? In fact, words say 1,000 pictures or more. Words can say thousands upon thousands of pictures for a single word. And so, but philosophers' bad approach to concepts. For example, if our concepts are floating abstractions, if our concepts are anti-concepts, and philosophy and religion have sure trained people to think, well, that's just words. Oh, yeah, that's just words. Show me the facts. Show me. This is what sort of gives it sort of persuasive, initially a persuasive, argument for this picturism. Hey, don't confuse me with your words, which can so easily lie. Show me the facts. Well, no series of image can really show you all the facts. You need concepts to get at all the facts. And you need concepts to even interpret which facts about this picture, even though there may be 1,000 implicit facts in that picture, which of those facts are important in this instance about that picture. We need concepts, concepts, concepts. Only words can really help us understand and get to this. And, sure, people can lie with words. Sure, words can be floating abstractions, which aren't tied to concretes. But if our concepts are carefully tied to concretes, if we've been rigorous about the formation of our concepts, if we're careful about being able to reduce our abstractions to their concrete reality, and if we can logically interrelate all such concepts that can be reduced to reality, then we can be confident in our concepts. Part of it is not just this picturism, but the urge to picturism, because people have such a distrust of the conceptual level, thanks to the misuse of concepts by philosophers.
Yeah. So I think, failure to reduce and I mean, it's a whole different ball game if we talk about the validity of concepts. And actually, a plug here would be our Sunday study sessions where we, in fact, we have just covered rationalism, which is a way some people misuse concepts. So that would be a whole different ballgame. But I agree, if we do reduce concepts to perceptual data, we can have certainty, contextual certainty, but we can operate our knowledge. And we can have not disease, hunger, and whatever other.
This is why Ayn Rand's brilliant solution to the problem of universals, to her understanding of what concepts are and how they function, is so vital. Once we have a clear understanding of the relationship between the universal and the specific, between the concept and the percept, which is what Ayn Rand gives us, we can now be confident, in effect, about the operations of our conceptual level. And that is key here. Philosophy has failed in that regard up till now, up till Ayn Rand at least, and that has given persuasiveness to the, hey, let's go by pictures, because that's reality, those are the facts, which is, people who are fact-oriented can be honestly misled into that. And their emotions can be overwhelmed if the image is powerful enough, overwhelmed such that they can't really think about it. But in any event, we need concepts, we need words to properly understand. If we don't have those, we are reduced to the animal level of consciousness. And for humans, that's a death sentence.
Right. So we do have a few super chats. So first of all, Jeff Bannister with $5 Canadian. Blackface photos of PM Trudeau made statements of hypocrisy despite knowing the context of why he did it back in the day. I don't have much context about PM Trudeau. If you do, James.
Well, I think that there's a broader issue. What we're talking about here is picturism. And so I'd ask, well, did Prime Minister Trudeau use images, out of context images, to evoke an emotional reaction rather than give a conceptual argument for his policy? That would be what it would turn on. And I'm not familiar with the images that this guy may be, the questioner may be using. But it is just, picturism is just an example of the wider problem of being concrete bound, narrowing your focus to a single concrete to the exclusion of others, because that is in effect what the psychoepistemology of this picturism is doing. Show you this image, evoke the emotional response, make you forget everything else that might be relevant, and just focus on this that's evoking your emotions. Politicians do that with words, sometimes out of context, saying something, you know, that just is out of context, or still worse, by presenting the image, which could even be more powerfully misleading.
Yeah, and we have further context here. Thanks, Dylan. So Trudeau painted his face to look like a black person, and those pictures resurfaced.
Oh, yes. Woof. Wow. You know, there is a terrible history of discrimination involved in certain kinds of entertainment in North America, minstrel shows, where white people would put literally black makeup on, dress up, and sort of mock black entertainers. And many found this deeply offensive at the time, and since then people have said, boy, for white people, especially white people in North America, to put on blackface is necessarily going to be offensive to African Americans. And for Trudeau, a leftist who would normally be sympathetic to that, what you're doing there is finding a contradiction. But there, the image of the prime minister in blackface doesn't answer the question, does it? It doesn't tell me the wider context, the context of his knowledge, why specifically he did it in this case. Even an image, now I'm no big fan of Prime Minister Trudeau, but even a single image of someone wearing blackface is not going to tell me that, okay, he's a racist who was being indifferent to the offense that African Americans might take to it. I still need more facts. I still need more integration. I still need to understand that in its historical context, or the blackface makes no sense to me. I'd have to know and load up all that American history about minstrels, the racism of minstrel shows. Make sense?
Suppose so. So the next super chat is a pleasant one. Always a great show, gentlemen. A great show, James.
Thank you, Ed. It's great because of you too.
So on this note, I think we should wrap up. Thank you very much, James. This has been a wonderful discussion. I've learned a lot, both via the lecture and our discussion. I would like to say that Heresy UK has many privileges that you will enjoy if you become a paid subscriber. So do consider it. We have given you conceptual data about why this might be a good decision for you. So please consider it. Smash the like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe if you like this kind of content. And until the next time, goodbye.
Thank you.